The early days of the Pacific War were defined by shock, speed, and sudden imbalance. In those skies, Japan introduced its ace, the Mitsubishi Zero, while America scrambled to counter with the rugged Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. To the Japanese, the Warhawk was not an unknown silhouette. They had studied its lines, tracked its performance in China, and dismissed it as a blunt instrument compared to their agile Zero. But impressions formed in theory rarely match the truth revealed in combat. The first time Japanese pilots faced the Warhawk in numbers, they noted its differences immediately. Unlike the nimble Zero, the P-40 was heavier, with broad wings and a muscular fuselage. It lacked the effortless grace of Japan's finest fighter, yet it projected an aura of durability. Where the Zero darted like a hawk, the Warhawk loomed like a predator with claws of steel. To many Japanese aviators, it seemed slow, even clumsy, but that assumption would prove costly. Halfway into those first encounters, one thing became clear. The P-40 could take punishment and keep flying. Japanese gunfire that would have shredded a Zero often failed to cripple the Warhawk. American pilots could dive steeply, absorb damage, and escape with their machines intact. For the Zero's pilots, used to dominating the sky with sheer maneuverability, this resilience was unnerving. And before we continue, make sure you resubscribe so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the untold truths of aviation history. For Japanese commanders, the Warhawk became a puzzle. It lacked the elegance of their own fighters, but its strengths were hidden beneath its rugged skin. Pilots reported that it was fast in a dive, nearly impossible to catch once it built momentum, and far tougher than expected. The Japanese began to realize that while the Warhawk would never outturn them, it would not break easily. This was not a fragile bird. It was a machine built to fight a war of attrition. The Warhawk's first impression on Japan was not awe, but curiosity, tinged with a subtle unease. What looked like a brute might, in time, prove more dangerous than anticipated. Once the initial impressions faded, Japanese analysts began to evaluate the Warhawk's technical profile. On paper, it lacked the finesse of the Zero. Its Allison V1710 engine produced about 1,040 horsepower, driving the fighter to speeds just over 360 miles per hour. In a turning duel, the P-40 seemed hopelessly outclassed. Yet the more the Japanese studied it, the more they realized its power lay in areas the Zero could not rival. The Warhawk's frame was built like armor. Unlike the lightly constructed Zero, the P-40 carried self-sealing fuel tanks and cockpit protection that shielded the pilot from enemy fire. Japanese pilots quickly noticed how often their bursts failed to bring the Warhawk down. This durability gave American flyers something invaluable, the confidence to fight another day. Against the Zero, survival often depended on agility. Against the Warhawk, survival came from sheer toughness. Its diving ability was another revelation. The P-40's heavy structure allowed it to withstand terminal velocity dives that would rip a Zero apart. Japanese aviators, accustomed to dictating the pace of battle, suddenly found their prey escaping into steep descents, re-emerging to strike with hit-and-run attacks. The Warhawk could not outturn them, but it could outlast and outdive them, a dangerous combination. Armament added to its menace. 6. 50 caliber Browning machine guns gave the P-40 formidable firepower, capable of tearing through fragile Japanese fighters in a single burst. The Zero's cannons were lethal, but they carried limited ammunition. The Warhawk, by contrast, could sustain longer bursts, raining down a wall of lead that left Japanese pilots wary of frontal assaults. To Japan's engineers, the P-40 represented a different philosophy of warplane design. It was less about elegance and more about endurance. It lacked glamour, but in its ruggedness lay a hidden strength, one that frustrated Zero pilots and forced them to rethink tactics. By the spring of 1942, the Warhawk had earned a reputation in Japanese reports as an enemy that refused to fall. It was not the most graceful adversary, but it was one that could never be ignored. The first true tests of the P-40 against Japanese aircraft came in the skies over China and Burma. where the famed Flying Tigers met the Zero head-on. Japanese pilots, who entered the war confident in their dominance, were caught off guard by the Warhawk's unconventional style. Unlike aircraft that tried to turn with the Zero, the P-40 refused to play by those rules. It fought on its own terms, trading elegance for ruthless practicality. Dogfights revealed a clear pattern. Whenever a Warhawk attempted a turning battle, it was quickly outmaneuvered and destroyed. But the American pilots learned fast. They relied on boom and zoom tactics, diving at tremendous speed, unleashing heavy gunfire, and then climbing back to altitude before the Zero could respond. Japanese reports from 1942 described this as fighting without spirit, dismissing it as cowardly. Yet the losses mounted, and soon the critique turned into grudging respect. In the skies over Rangoon, Japanese formations expecting easy kills found themselves ambushed by P-40s that struck from above and disappeared before a counterattack could be launched. Survivors noted with frustration that even when riddled with bullets, the Warhawk often limped back to base. The Zero, light and fragile, could not take the same punishment. One captured Japanese pilot allegedly confessed, "It is not fast, it is not graceful, but it does not die." That simple admission revealed the shift in perception. The Warhawk could never dominate in a duel, but it could wear down even the most experienced ace. By the time American squadrons transitioned fully into the P-40, Japanese commanders realized this was no temporary obstacle. It was a workhorse, grinding away at their air forces, battle after battle. The Zero might still dictate terms in perfect conditions, but in prolonged engagements, the Warhawk's resilience began to show. What Japan discovered in combat was not an elegant rival, but a stubborn adversary, one that refused to be broken. And in war, that resilience was often deadlier than speed or grace. By 1942, Japanese pilots had grown accustomed to dominating the skies. Their Zero was the symbol of superiority, light, agile, and seemingly unstoppable. But the Warhawk introduced a new kind of challenge, not through elegance, but through persistence. This shift carried heavy psychological weight. The P-40 earned a reputation for survival. Even when hit hard, its rugged construction and armored cockpit allowed pilots to return home. Japanese aviators began noticing that their bullets often failed to finish the job. Reports from field units described frustration at Warhawks that would not fall. This stubbornness gnawed at morale. The Zero's doctrine relied on intimidation and lightning victories, but when opponents kept coming back, the psychological advantage evaporated. For younger pilots, the Warhawk was especially daunting. Training emphasized close-in duels and the honor of outmaneuvering an enemy, but the Americans in their P-40s refused to fight that way. Instead, they slashed in with devastating firepower, then escaped before a Zero could close the gap. Japanese officers criticized this style as dishonorable, but for the men flying against it, the truth was unsettling. The Warhawk had rewritten the rules. Over Burma and China, entire squadrons hesitated to pursue Warhawks into steep dives. They knew that at high speed, the Zero lost much of its agility, while the P-40 thrived. That hesitation, the brief moment of doubt, was often enough to tilt the battle. The Warhawk didn't just resist bullets, it sowed uncertainty. One Japanese after-action report captured the mood bluntly. "It fights without elegance, but it kills with certainty." That phrase circulated among pilots, and over time the Warhawk became seen less as a clumsy brute and more as an unnerving predator. It lacked the beauty of a true dogfighter, but its presence in the skies weighed heavily on Japanese confidence. What emerged was a psychological shift. The Zero was still feared by the Allies, but it was no longer the only predator in the sky. The Warhawk had proven that brute force, resilience, and unorthodox tactics could erode even the strongest aura of invincibility. For Japan's aviators, the Warhawk became not just an opponent, but a reminder that dominance was slipping away. By the war's end, the P-40 Warhawk was never hailed as a masterpiece of design. It wasn't the fastest, nor the most maneuverable, and by 1943, newer fighters outclassed it on paper. Yet in the memories of Japan's aviators, it remained one of the most stubborn adversaries they faced. The Warhawk carved out a legacy not through superiority, but through resilience and sheer effectiveness in the hands of those who flew it. Captured Japanese documents revealed a telling contrast. Early assessments dismissed the P-40 as obsolete, too heavy, too slow, and poorly suited for the nimble dogfights the Zero excelled in. But later reports shifted in tone. They noted its rugged armor, its firepower, and its ability to survive punishment that would doom lighter planes. It was grudging respect born from battlefield reality. The Warhawk had forced Japan to confront the limits of its own philosophy. Perhaps the greatest testament came from the Flying Tiger's reputation. Japanese pilots feared their disciplined hit-and-run strikes, which exploited every strength of the Warhawk while avoiding its weaknesses. The aircraft's identity became inseparable from those who flew it. For Japan, this meant that fighting the P-40 was never just about contending with a machine. It was facing an enemy that understood how to break their doctrine. When historians look back, the Warhawk is often overshadowed by the P-51 Mustang or the F-6F Hellcat. Yet to the men who clashed with it in the skies of Burma, China, and the Pacific, the Warhawk was unforgettable. It was the fighter that refused to vanish, that turned survival into a weapon, and that challenged the myth of Japanese air invincibility. For Japan, the P-40 became a symbol of something larger. That brute endurance could wear down elegance, and that even a so-called second-rate fighter could change the course of air battles. Its legacy was not beauty, but tenacity, a reminder that in war, it is often the aircraft that keeps coming back that truly haunts the enemy.